you're watching the Daily Roundup by People's Dispatch, where we bring you some of the top stories from around the world. Let's take a look at the headlines. Court orders compensation for Afghans killed in Dutch airstrike. Ceasefire announced in DRC from tomorrow. Escalation of right-wing violence in Bolivia, Santa Cruz. 3 more Palestinians dead from Israeli raids. In a first case of its kind in the Netherlands, a district court in The Hague ruled on Wednesday, November 23, that a 2007 Dutch airstrike in Chora in Afghanistan, which had reportedly killed 20 Afghan civilians, was illegal, and it has ordered the government to provide financial compensation to the victims. The court ruled that the early morning airstrikes carried out by the Dutch military on June 17, 2007 on civilian homes were a violation of international humanitarian law. The court observed that the attacks with helicopters and fighter jets, F-16s, were carried out without enough information and without enough attempts to establish the presence of combatants. The judgment notes that the Dutch military fired at least 28 bombs on the civilian compound in Chora in Uruzgan province in central Afghanistan. The verdict came after 4 survivors of the bombing filed a civil suit against the Dutch state. The names of the petitioners were not revealed in the court document, but the document notes that at least 7 members of the family of one of the complainants were also killed in the airstrike. The Dutch military had claimed that the compound was used by the Taliban. However, the court found that that was not the case and that it was a civilian compound. The court also questioned Dutch military's claims that they had information about the compound being used by the Taliban, saying that that information was insufficient and old, noting that there were no firing from the location for hours before the attack. Dutch forces were part of the US-led international military invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, which lasted until August last year. The United States has held Afghanistan's Taliban-led government at the time responsible for the September 11 attacks. The United States and its NATO allies led an international coalition of forces in the country, identifying it as the International Security Assistance Force, or ISAF. The ISAF has been accused of being responsible for thousands of civilian casualties amounting to war crimes in Afghanistan. However, only in a handful of cases, the United States and some of its allies have admitted to killing innocent civilians and ordered compensation, often found to be inaccurate and inadequate. Even after repeatedly pointing to the facts, the US and its NATO allies refused to take action against their personnel responsible for those war crimes, and again, in most of the cases, they refuse even to take responsibility. Leaders of several African countries on Wednesday, November 23, in a joint statement announced an end to violence and hostilities in the conflict in the DRC, or Democratic Republic of the Congo. The announcement is aimed at putting a stop to the intense fighting and conflict between the Congolese troops and the rebel M23 armed group. The internal civil conflict currently taking place between the M23 and Congolese troops in the east of the country has resulted in the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people, with the United Nations placing the number at 300,000 since the fighting erupted again. Just in the month of October alone, 188,000 people were displaced by the renewed fighting. The two sides have been embroiled in a fresh conflict for about a year following the armed group's re-emergence. The M23 group has taken control of large parts of the territory in eastern DRC, particularly in North Kivu, with violence spilling over to South Kivu and Ituri as well, provinces which are home to more than 120 armed groups for close to 30 years. According to reports, the decision to implement an immediate ceasefire in the DRC from 6 p.m. onwards on Friday, November 25, was reached after the African leaders from the DRC, Rwanda, Burundi and Angola held talks in Luanda, Angola's capital. Additionally, the talks led to another significant decision regarding the ceasefire. The leaders decided that if the M23 rebels do not abide by the ceasefire, an East African regional force will be dispatched to intervene and maintain peace and security. Kenya had earlier this month already deployed its troops in the eastern DRC in a peacekeeping role from the Seven-Nation East African Community or EAC bloc. The M23 rebels have also been told to withdraw from areas under their occupation, besides disarming and surrendering to the Congolese forces. News of the ceasefire was a positive development for the hundreds of thousands of displaced Congolese people. The United Nations, following the announcement, said that displaced people should go home within 7 days. However, activists and right groups have noted that it is not likely that the M23 will stop the violence and surrender without sustained military and diplomatic pressure on it. Therefore, people are still waiting to see if the violence actually stops. The M23 has offered to take part in peace talks with the government to resolve the conflict, but it has not agreed to the government's condition of withdrawing from all the areas it occupies. As a result, the government has refused to enter into peace talks with the armed group. Moving on to our third story, the acts of violence and vandalism in Bolivia's Santa Cruz department have intensified following the call for radicalization of pressure measures by the president of the far-right provincial Santa Cruz Civic Committee, Ernesto Cerate. The residents of the Ambrosio Villarroel neighborhood on Wednesday, November 23, confronted the members of the Civic Committee who were blocking the 4th Ring and Radial 19 Avenue in the capital of Santa Cruz. Initially, they succeeded in clearing the blockade. However, shortly after, the residents in favor of the strike came back in large numbers, leading to confrontations between the two sides that lasted for about an hour. Those in favor of the strike finally managed to maintain the blockade and have reinforced it, making it impossible even for a bicycle to pass through. Photographs disseminated through social networks showed that the groups clashed with sticks, with some even carrying machetes. Officially, the number of injured people and the seriousness of the injuries have not yet been specified. According to unofficial reports, at least 5 people suffered serious injuries who were immediately taken to hospitals. At the same time, the secretary of the Health Workers Union at the San Juan de Dios Hospital condemned the far-right opposition groups attacking health workers and hindering the passage of ambulances across the department. He said that the group members who have blocked the roads are demanding payment from anyone who wants to pass through, and that they are assaulting those who fail to comply with sticks and baseball bats. Santa Cruz's police have so far registered more than 20 cases of physical attacks against health workers and ambulances, many of them resulting in patients being unable to reach a medical center. On Tuesday, November 22, Cerate declared that the protests and roadblocks in all Santa Cruz provinces would be intensified until the law census is approved and the redistribution of resources and seats for the 2025 election is guaranteed. Violent protests as a part of an indefinite strike have been ongoing for 32 days. Its pretext has been a demand to bring forward the national census, but the national government says that this is merely an excuse used to justify violent mobilizations aimed at launching another coup against the socialist government. And finally, fresh violent raids carried out by Israeli security forces on Wednesday, November 23, in the city of Nablus in the occupied West Bank resulted in the killings of 2 more Palestinians, increasing the Palestinian death toll by Israeli violence this year to over 200. The Palestinian Health Ministry identified the slain men as 22-year-old Muhammad Hisham Muhammad Abu Kishk and 30-year-old Muhammad Ahmad Hassan Herzallah. The 2 men were killed in separate raids carried out by the Israeli forces. The ministry said that while Abu Kishk was mortally wounded in the abdomen as a result of indiscriminate live firing by the invading Israeli forces during the raid, Herzallah died of injuries he had sustained during a similar raid in the month of July. Reports noted that the Israeli forces carrying out the raid yesterday were accompanied by a number of armored military vehicles, including a bulldozer. The raid was reportedly carried out to provide security to the settlers' illegal and provocative visit to the Joseph's tomb in the eastern part of Nablus and prevent Palestinian activities and movements during that visit. During the same raid, the Israeli forces killed 16-year-old Palestinian miner Ahmad Ajmad Shahadeh along with injuring 6 others. The Israeli raid and the crackdown on Palestinians owing to the settlers' visit led to clashes between the soldiers and Palestinian civilians of the area, during which the soldiers used live ammunition, gas bombs and tear gas canisters to repress the Palestinians. So far in 2022, Israel has killed 202 Palestinians in the occupied territories of the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza, including 57 children. The United Nations has said that this is the highest death toll of Palestinians killed in these kinds of raids and attacks on a yearly average basis since they started keeping records in 2005. And that is all we have for today's episode. For more such stories, visit our website www.peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram.